In the 19th century, when the socialists nowadays, they all called it the robber barons days and so forth and nonsense like that. The 19th century in Canada and in the US brought unprecedented prosperity to the lower classes and to middle classes. Otherwise, please explain to me why so many people moved from Europe and other countries in the 19th century to America. You know, the socialists tend to tell you, oh, it was the robber barons' day where the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the Dufours and so forth, they all made a lot of money and the poor people had to work in factories. Everybody was working in factories. Go and look at the photo gallery of, say, Polish or Belgium or French or English coal workers in the 19th century. Go and look at the famine in Ireland. It was disastrous in Europe, and so they went to America, and it was better in America. But at that time, people had to take responsibility for themselves because there was no social security and no unemployment benefits. So you lost your job, you had nothing. But after essentially the Great Depression, these programs came up. And whereas the US had never spent on the federal government, or the federal government had never spent more than, say, 8 to 9% of GDP, by 1910, it started to grow and it accelerated after the Depression, especially under the bread and the butter and gun policy of Johnson in the 60s. And now most European countries, 60% of the budget is essentially government. So the government has expanded like a cancer. And as a result of that, economic growth has shrunk. You can ask any entrepreneur in America or small companies and so forth, small businessmen, what is the greatest threat to their business? They will all say government, regulation, and officials. Incompetent people like Baerbock and like Kamala Harris have no clue. They never worked a day in their lives. How would they know how to run a business? I ask myself, how do they know how to run a government, which is a bit more complicated than to run a bakery? I mean, I tell you, based on the governments we have now in the Western world, I really can't be optimistic. But they may print money and stocks may go up, but they may not go up in real terms. We had investments in Eastern Europe and so forth, but now, because I live in Asia and because of my age, I don't want to go and invest in Ukraine or in Poland and travel there every year. At my age, traveling becomes less enjoyable, largely also because of governments that have really messed up airports and security. For a while, if I went through airports, I couldn't even carry a nail clip. What do I want to do with a nail clipper in an airplane? Only a government official and bureaucrat can be as dumb as that. They serve Coca-Cola cans in airplanes and they embargo essentially small things for your health like nail clippers. A Coca-Cola can is a deadly weapon. You squeeze it in half, you have two instruments in your hand, which in each hand you could kill someone easily because the aluminum is very sharp. Every terrorist knows that, but the government officials, they think that the terrorists walk around with the nail clippers. I'm basically of the view that property prices in Eastern Europe will adjust upwards, and in Western Europe they will not go up a lot, except in, say, villages that are very inexpensive, where the government even gives you money to take residence. I think that Canada is an example where the currency has been weak and where stocks have not done particularly well. So yes, I sort of like mining stocks, but I have had the view for the last 40, 50 years, I rather own physical precious metals than mining stocks. I concede that mining stocks relative to the S&P and relative to the bullion price are extremely low. That I agree. But my sense is that mining stocks are acting horribly as, a group of stocks in the market. They don't really get a lot of momentum on the upside yet. And when gold price and silver price drop a little bit, they are hit hard. So I'm not very optimistic about mining stocks purely because they're not performing performing well. But I own some, and I think in a real strong bull market, they'll go up at some point, but it just hasn't happened yet. In my view, in a money printing environment, it's dangerous to short stocks. But in general, the S&P and especially the Nasdaq and specifically the Magnificent Seven are grossly overpriced, and they're also grossly overowned. Every Tom, Dick and Harry in the world who is a trader is long NVIDIA and the other FANG and FANG related stocks. And as a contrarian, I would buy other stocks and not these Magnificent Seven stocks. And I would essentially be light on the US stock market. I have no investments in America at the moment. I live in Thailand. Now, recently, they had some wonderful articles in papers and so forth that highlighted the fact that Thailand had all the characteristics of being a failed state. I love that, because the funny thing is Thailand has one of the largest retiree populations in the world. You know, people from all over the world, they come and retire in Thailand. Now, isn't it funny that people from the Western world, from all over Europe, and from the US and Canada and Australia and wherever, they come and retire in a country that is a failed state. Maybe the definition of failed state is wrong. I don't know. In any case, all these articles and then also brokerage reports, recently a very well-known strategist turned very bearish about Thailand and recommended to short the index. And I wrote 2 or 3 reports recently about the Asian stock markets. And I wrote about Thailand and said, even I can't see from where an economic improvement could take place. But I have to admit, that's what I wrote, that each time I went to a country where even I couldn't see from where an improvement could take place, the stock market right away went up like a rocket. And that's exactly what has happened recently. The market is up 10% in like 2 weeks. If you want to make big money, you must buy things that nobody wants. And optimism is the enemy of the rational investor. So if everybody in the world buys NVIDIA and trades NVIDIA, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't buy it. I think a concern everyone should have in the world is, say, a social revolution and expropriation of goods. That is a concern. The government, 2 years ago, they locked up people, families in their homes, and made it very difficult to travel unless you had a vaccine. So the government can come to you and say, look, either you take this injection that makes you mad or incapacitates you, or maybe they will go further. In any event, or you cannot travel anymore. This is a very strong interference into your personal freedom. Now, I have traveled the world for the last 60 years or 70 years. I've been to many different countries and so forth. For me to stay at home for 2 years is not a problem. I have a large property, I have a large garden, I have many dogs, I have trees, I have a river in front of me. It's not a problem. And in a badly organized society like Thailand, they can close down everything, but they can't close down the nightclubs that are owned by the police force. So when we talk about failed states and disorganized countries, there are some advantages. But I want to say this, if the governments could do that, they can come to you and to me and say, your property, well, we take it away. This should belong to the government. Your gold, we take it away, it should belong to the government. They can do anything they want. That's why I'm very disappointed by wealthy people who have power. They support the socialists because they know they can manipulate them. But the socialists are very dangerous in every society. One of the best books on capitalism, socialism, and democracy by Joseph Schumpeter. That people should read and study. In it, he has a speech he gave 6 months before he died, which describes exactly how the capitalistic system leads to socialism, largely because of the academics. The academics, they hate an entrepreneur who has no education and makes $1 million in a month or $1 billion. You understand? An academic, they think these simple people who through hard work and innovation without any education shouldn't become this rich. So that's one reason that then the wealthy people want to protect their wealth, and in a regulatory environment, they can probably protect their wealth better than in a wild entrepreneurial environment. I was on the panel of barons for more than 10 years. And there are 10 panel members at the round table, Barron's Round Table. These were among the brightest stars in America, like Pimco's, Bill Gross, and so forth and so on. And someone then compiled the statistics who had the best performance of all the panelists. To answer this criticism, in all modesty, I have to say I had the best performance. And the second best was a friend of mine, Felix Zulauf. And we had the best performance by miles. Now, I'm not saying that the next 10 years would have been equally good performance. But to people who say Mark is always bearish, I'd just like to point out, I was one of the first one to invest in emerging markets in the 1970s, 1980s, in Taiwan, in South Korea, in the Philippines, in Indonesia, in Thailand, when nobody else would invest in these countries. And then in 86, 87, I went to Latin America because I had discovered that in Latin America, because of high inflation, the valuations were dirt cheap. So we invested in Latin America, and Barron's even published a column in 1990, an upturn south of the border with my views. And then in 1991, a friend of mine, he alerted me to the colossal undervaluation of the Russian stock market. And so my friends and I, we formed, I think it was either the number one, the first Russian fund or the second Russian fund. And it had a super performance. For 10 years I was a partner, but then I sold it in late 1990s. And then who was bullish about commodities in 99, 2000? So I find it ridiculous for someone to say he's been bearish all the time. First of all, these people don't read my newsletter because they can't afford them. And characteristic of every industry, a doctor will never speak highly of another doctor who is a competitor. And in the financial sector, people speak badly of each other. If you go to a restaurant or you ask him, what is the best restaurant in your city? He says, mine. That's life. But I think it's important to have idiots in the world in the investment market because that provides opportunities for people who think. Stock market is a mechanism that transfers money from people that have no knowledge to the big boys. Like the SEC in America was formed in 1932 or 1933. They sold it to the public as an agency that would protect the small investor. That is the greatest lie that has ever been broadcasted. The SEC is an institution that protects wealthy people. Wall Street against the public, against lawsuits by the public, is that same. They formed the Consumer Protection Agency. It's a complete joke. It doesn't protect the consumer. It protects big companies against the consumer. But people believe all this nonsense that comes out of the government. The government says something, the people listen. They should switch off the radio, the TV. Give me an asset class that in the last 20 years did significantly better than gold, relatively low risk. And then people never look, they say Mark has been bearish about stocks. Who was interviewed on March 6, 2009? S&P 666. I said the market is bottoming out today because it was very oversold. And all the others, the super bears, they said the S&P, when it was at 666, will go to 400. This was not my view because I know the power of money printing. And this is my Bible about the economics inflation. So that is something people should maybe read and understand, that headwinds is the recession, lower demand, and the tailwind is money printing.